everyone. I welcome you to CEC lecture series. I'm Nupur Chawla, teaching English literature at Maitre College, Delhi University. And today's lecture is part of the ongoing series on English drama, and it's a second part of the lecture on Look Back in Anger by John Osborne. So in the previous lecture, we looked at the playwright's background, we looked at what the text is doing, we also understood some of the movements that the text is associated with, and towards the end of the lecture, we had started discussing the context which gave rise to this kind of a play which is which looks at the social and political issues critically. It engages with them from a critical standpoint, trying to understand and analyze, and also clearly takes a stand as well, right? So now, having looked at that, what we said about the context was that it's a post-war British society in the 1940s, which was rallying for change, right? The harsh conditions of war had generated a sense of shared struggle and destiny. That was British society in the 1940s, just emerged from the Second World War. And at this time, the reconstruction and restructuring of the society on democratic principles was one of the aims. And this, we said, laid the foundations of a welfare state in the British context, right? That's something which we had discussed towards the end of the previous lecture. Now, having discussed the mood of the 40s, we move to the 50s. Now, the 50s were associated with immense growth in economy and prosperity, right? So people were making money. There was a boom in economy. The society had started to recover financially from the losses incurred during the war. So that upward curve was already, available. It had come on the horizon in the 1950s. But there was one thing at this time, that, this affluence was restricted to just a certain social section in society. The money that was being earned was not, being equally distributed, which I'm sure you're able to notice by now is quite the contrary of what the people had dreamed of. So the idea of the welfare state, which had propelled everybody's common efforts in the 1940s, now was not really honored as reality unfolded. So the educated youth in the 50s, from the lower and the working classes then, who had benefited from the Education Act of 1944, they found that their dreams were thwarted due to social and class rigidities, right? So when the 50s witnessed a very preferential growth in that sense, so people from, particularly the educated young people from the lower and the working classes, they felt that they were at a disadvantage because their dreams were thwarted, or their dreams were left unrealized because of the class rigidities which society had now started to come up with, right? And this led to a sense of alienation, disillusionment, and also apathy, right? So that's why, if you go back to our discussion in the previous part of this lecture, the angry young man became the protagonist. Why young man? Because in particular, the youth were given education according to the Education Act of 1944, right? But then the same youth didn't get the opportunity, didn't get an equal opportunity to, bring that education to, or to put that education to some purpose or to some cause or to some use, because the opportunities then were just restricted to certain section of society. So this led to a mass, a sense of disillusionment. They felt alienated, disconnected from the context. And finally, they also developed a kind of an apathy, that they stopped caring about society because they felt that it was unjust to them, right? So from here, therefore, as I just now mentioned, emerged the post-war rebel hero, the angry young man. So let's look at this figure at a little more length and see how this prototype of the protagonist became quite popular around this time, not just in Osborne but also in Kingsley Amis as well. So now, angry young man, who was he? He was a post-war rebel hero who was the spokesman of the under-30s generation of the post-war Britain, right? So he was under 30, he was rebel, and of course he mirrored those who were living after the Second World War in Britain, right? Now, what were his features or characteristics like? He exposed hypocrisies of the upper class ethos and lifestyle, right? The angry young man would point towards the hypocrisies of the upper class ethos and lifestyle, and he carried a deep sense of disaffection and lack of direction of those not privileged by birth. So, three things. A, he exposed the hypocrisies of the upper classes. B, he had a sense of dissatisfaction. C, he also lacked direction, which was not available to the underprivileged or to those who did not belong to the privileged class, right? Or who were not privileged by birth in that sense, right? So we see that the anger of the young people at the time was directed towards this upper middle class, or let's say the upper classes, who enjoyed all the benefits, who remained to be hypocrites, despite such provisions. And while these people who genuinely wanted to get ahead, they did not have the means or the opportunity to do so, right? So this, culminates in the figure of the angry young man as we see depicted in the works of the time. Now, you see, Walter Allen, who's a critic, he wrote in the newspaper, the New Statesman, about Kingsley Amis's book, Lucky Jim, right? So he was reviewing it, and the description of the hero that Walter Allen gives in Lucky Jim actually matches Osborne's Jimmy Porter, right? Because both the texts were written around the same time, and they are known to belong to a similar genre as well, right? So let's see what Walter Allen wrote about Lucky Jim, and which also finds resonance in Osborne's Jimmy Porter. He says, and I quote, "A new hero has risen amongst us. It is the phony to which his nerve ends are tremblingly exposed. He is at odds with his university education. He has seen through the academic racket as he sees through all others," unquote. So over here, there is a mention of a new hero, right, who has risen amongst us. Amongst us would mean that he is not somebody who belongs to, let's say from a upper section or a class which is disconnected. No, he is one of the common people. He is, irked by a particular kind of people, that is the phony or those who are fake, right? He also is at odds, they say, with his university education, because he sees through the academic racket which has trapped everyone. So while education promised a bright future, but unfortunately that future was reserved, it was reserved for just a particular section of people, right? And all these issues, all these realities anger this person, right? And that's why the mention of angry young man, right? Now, having looked at these prototypical protagonist and the phenomenon, now we move to discussing Look Back in Anger, the text. Now, if you look at the characters, Jimmy Porter is described in the play as one with blistering honesty, as his makes few friends, unquote. So his blistering honesty, such as his, makes few friends. So Jimmy Porter, the angry young man of John Osborne, was brutally honest. Again, connected to the genre, which is what, the kitchen sink realism. And remember, we had said that how it it is actually harsh, sharp, direct, etc. The other character is Cliff, who's a close friend of Jimmy Porter's, and see how the text describes him. He is a soothing, natural counterpoint to Jimmy, right? So, soothing, natural counterpoint. So, while Jimmy is angry, Cliff is somewhat soothing, but has similar ideas as Jimmy Porter, right? Third character is Allison, who's Jimmy's wife and belongs to the upper class, the upper middle class, and therefore both of them, they conflict over that point of difference between the two. Then we have Helena, who's described as the royalty of that middle class womanhood. Now, why is she called as the royalty of that middle class womanhood? Because she has that air of confidence about herself. She has that air of self-assurance, right? So, which is what makes her quite close to Jimmy Porter, the man, as well, right? And the final character is Hugh, who is Jimmy's friend, right? So, very, kind of a compact character list there. And now, if we are to look at some of the issues of the play, the foremost is that, the play presents a domestic tiff, a domestic strife. And this domesticity or this domestic dynamic is in direct conjunction with the play being a kitchen sink realism. Now, let's see how do we notice the domestic tiff. Jimmy says, "You can talk, can't you? You can express an opinion. Or does the white woman's burden make it impossible for you to think?" And what does Allison say? "I'm sorry, I wasn't listening properly." So what do we notice here? We see that Jimmy is clearly unhappy with Allison and her behavior, and he says that he is, he has an issue with her silence, and he tells her that you can talk and express your opinion. Or is it that the white woman's burden is such that you're unable to think? Now, you see, the phrase white woman's burden is actually, adapted from the phrase white man's burden, which was used by the Britishers for the Indians, that it is their burden to civilize the Indians, who are apparently, according to them, savages. So, the phrase white man's burden or white woman's burden then is meant to convey a sense of superiority. So, he associates that superiority with his wife, that is Allison, right? And we notice that in the little tiff between them. So, now again taking you back to the very first point that we had made, that how this a play becomes a play of class struggle, or the struggle between these two classes, the middle class or the working class, and the upper middle class or the upper classes, right? So, Allison belonged to the upper class and Jimmy to just the opposite class. Both of them are constantly in a state of clash, and this clash is played out in a domestic setup. Now, the next thing that we notice, or the next idea, apart from domestic space, which is also relevant to the play, is the contempt of the upper classes, which is widespread in throughout the three acts of the play. Now, let's look at some instances from the text where we see the contempt. Jimmy says, "Who buys this damned thing? Haven't you read the other posh paper yet?" Now, this is Jimmy talking to Cliff, and he says, "Who buys this newspaper? Haven't you read the other posh paper yet?" Now, you see, even the newspapers are divided into those which are read by posh people and those which are read by commoners, right? So, again, class consciousness is very, very ingrained in the people of the time. And also, there's some kind of an absurdity about it, right? A newspaper is supposed to carry the same information, right? It's supposed to carry the same points of views. But what's the difference between, or what difference does it make to a newspaper, whether the readers are upper class or not, right? So, a posh paper, then indicates, or this phrase used by Jimmy indicates that class consciousness, right? And at another point of time in the play, he is discussing something with his wife, Alison, and he makes this remark, "Oh, nothing, nothing. Damn you, damn both of you, damn them all," unquote. So, damn you, of course, refers to Alison. Damn both of you, the second person over there is Cliff, and damn them all, them over there refers to the section of society to which Alison belongs, that is the upper classes. So you see, even as the tiff is between the husband and wife, but through that a larger point is made by the playwright of the tiff between the two classes, where the middle class or the working class or the lower class is disaffected because of the unequal distribution of opportunities and resources, right? Next, a reference comes in where Jimmy showcases what he thinks of the attitude of the upper classes. He says, and I quote, "Nobody thinks, nobody cares, no beliefs, no convictions, and no enthusiasm," unquote. Now, this is Jimmy, almost summing up the upper classes. Nobody thinks. They don't use their mind. Nobody cares. They are indifferent towards situations of others. They are very self-consumed. No beliefs, no convictions, and no enthusiasm. So there is no value system. There is no set of principles which really define these people. They are fluid, right? And they do not really have a purpose to their existence or to what they do. So this kind of a hollowness, hypocrisy is something which really bothers Jimmy, and he is almost on a rant against it, right? Now, we very clearly see, how these instances from the text showcase this kind of a class clash in that sense, right? And we also notice at another point this clash where, Jimmy disapproves of not just his own wife, who belongs to the upper sections, but even her brother, right? Again, a very quintessential domestic situation. The wife's family becomes the enemy when the wife herself is, not accepted. So, using the typicality of domestic situation to make a social point, that is what Osborne has done, and that's where his craft also lies. Now, let's look at what he thinks about Nigel, that is his own wife, Alison's brother. He says, "And nothing is more vague about Nigel than his knowledge. His knowledge of life and ordinary things is so hazy," unquote. Now again, what is he associating with Nigel? A lack of knowledge or vague knowledge, and also the fact that he has a very sketchy idea of ordinary things. So what is it that they have an idea of? They have an idea of luxury. They have an idea of things of comfort. That's what defines their sense of engagement, and not, all these issues. So again, his problem with Nigel is not just a problem with the individual, but it's a problem with the whole class, right? Now, this is all Jimmy ranting against that particular class, right? But we also have Alison acknowledging what his husband is doing. And let's look at this quote where she says, "Together they were frightening. They both came to regard me as a sort of hostage from those sections of society they had declared a war on," unquote. So Alison, belonging to the upper class, felt that she was a hostage of both Hugh as well as Jimmy, who had, as she says, declared a war on that section of society because they were unhappy with the upper classes and the injustice that was being done because of them, right? So all these instances from the play reiterate how it's a kitchen sink drama, how the cultural context seeped into this representation, and how Osborne then takes up important issues social issues of the time for analysis. Towards the end, I would now like to talk a bit about Raymond Williams' views in the play. Now, you see, Raymond Williams is a cultural materialist critic, and he has written the essay titled "Look Back in Anger, John Osborne." He makes some important observations about the play over there, and let's look at what he says. First, what's important is his observation about the setting of Osborne's play. He says, and I quote, "It is that traditional room of the naturalist theatre, the room as trap, with the sounds and messages of a determining and frustrating world coming in from the outside," unquote. So, the play is set in a one-room attic, and he says, for Williams, he says it's a classic setting because the room acts as a trap. It's a one-room apartment, so therefore, of course, it acts as a trap. Now, a trap which is also felt by the lower classes, the working classes, or the middle classes. A trap, that is, they got the education, but they are not able to make anything of it. Right? So that sense of being trapped, that sense of being betrayed, is then replicated, according to Williams, in the setting of the play. Right? And the sound of and the messages of the frustrating world are coming from outside. Yeah? So, this value system then enters into the setting as defined by Raymond Williams. Next, he says, going on about the setting, he says, and I quote, "The sickness of a society is reenacted in this particular enclosed form as the sickness of available relationships and of this sick man at the center," unquote. So what is Williams saying here? He says that the sickness of a society is reenacted in this enclosed form, right? Which means what? What is sickness of society? The society with its gaps, right? The society which was materialistic, which was focused just on providing access to the upper classes. So this sickness was reenacted in this one room, according to Williams. And how was it reenacted? As the sickness of available relationships. So you see that sickness, according to Williams, transfers into the sickness that we witness between Alison and Jim. So that sour relationship between the husband and the wife is nothing but a reflection of the social norms, is nothing but a reflection of how the society is operating, how the two classes are at odds, right? And of course, not just the relationship between the husband and the wife, but also the view of the protagonist also carries that flavor of sickness. Now you see how beautifully Raymond Williams notices the form and connects it with the theme and the context which Osborne is writing about. Yeah. A third quotation from the essay is where Raymond Williams looks at Osborne's Look Back in Anger as a working class drama, right? And he says that the general state of feeling matters more in these plays than any precise social setting. The true social experience is of a general restlessness, disorganization and frustration, unquote. So Williams says that these plays, what we call as the working class drama, with a certain kind of a protagonist, over here, it's not the precise social setting which matters, but what is at the center is a general state of feeling. That general state of feeling which is replicated in society as well, right? So the setting is not as important per se, but the general feeling that becomes important. And the true social experience is of a general restlessness, disorganization and frustration. This is another part of the working class drama, as Williams would call it, and we see that replicated in Osborne's Look Back in Anger. The last observation that Williams makes, and a very important one, he says that it's a play with a fusion of class war and a sex war. What seems crucial is that the woman is made the bearer of society in a literal way. He says that in Look Back in Anger, as there is a class conflict between the two, Alison and Jimmy, at the same time, it seems to be a conflict around the lines of their opposite gender as well, right? So this conflict, this two-pronged conflict, is quite seminal according to Williams, and he says that woman in the play seems to be the bearer of society, which means that a woman, which is Alison, is treated by Jimmy as carrying the ethos of the times. And this is noticed in this quotation by him. He says, Jimmy says, she just devours me whole, as if I were some overlarge rabbit. That's me. That bulge around her navel, if you are wondering what it is me, unquote. So what do we see? He pictures Alison as someone who has devoured him. By extension, what is he trying to say? That the class that Alison belongs to, the upper middle class or the upper classes, have devoured the working class or the lower classes. Devoured how? Because they have left no room for their advancement. They have eaten up everybody's share, and they are the ones who are now enjoying and thriving. So what Williams is pointing out is that how one woman in the play becomes the bearer of the whole society, right? She comes to characterize the way she is treated by Jimmy. She seems to characterize the whole society, right? So what we've seen in this lecture then is how the play, is impacted by the post-war British society, why there was a sense of disillusionment which led to the creation of the protagonist, Angry Young Man. We notice that it has a domestic setup, and it is through that domestic setup is the social norms, the social issues are dramatized. We notice that it's a war between classes, it's a war between two genders. Again, war used in a metaphorical sense, where it's a kind of a clash, a conflict. And we notice that how this play has come to be a very important text in this tradition of the kitchen sink realism, and also what Raymond Williams would call it as a working class drama. And the characters, the situations, the setting, the general feeling all replicate what is going on in society of the time. Thank you.